Nathan Cole lived most of his life believing that Larkwood, his small UK town, was the safest place anyone could imagine. He enjoyed simple routines, quiet mornings, and a stable marriage that he thought would last forever. His wife, Elena, worked at an estate agency and often returned home hours later than expected, but Nathan assumed it was just part of her demanding job. Only when he discovered a stack of hidden hotel receipts and unexplained cash withdrawals did he realize something was wrong. The discovery felt like a sudden tear in his reality. He tried to push the thoughts away, but his mind kept circling back to the same possibility that made his stomach twist. Elena was living a second life, and he had never noticed. As rumors spread around town about her secret meetings in an abandoned car park, Nathan could no longer deny the truth forming in front of him. Elena's hidden world became more unstable the more she tried to protect it. Her affair with a wealthy man from another city had grown dangerous, not because of passion, but because of the fear that Nathan's discovery could ruin the comfortable life she was building. She convinced herself that Nathan would expose everything, and once that idea settled in her mind, it twisted into something darker. The decision she made next was not sudden. It was a slow slide into desperation. One evening, when Nathan returned from work and stepped inside their home as usual, Elena waited with a small handgun she had secretly acquired. Without hesitation, she fired 6 times. The sound echoed through the neighborhood, sending residents rushing to their windows and calling emergency services. Despite the wounds, Nathan survived because help arrived within minutes. Doctors fought through the night to keep him alive, and by morning, they succeeded. Nathan awoke in the hospital surrounded by white walls and police officers who wanted answers. But he spoke very little. His mind repeated the look on Elena's face before she pulled the trigger. While he lay in recovery, Elena vanished. She abandoned her job, emptied her belongings, and hid with her lover, leaving no clear path behind. Police searched across neighboring towns, but she stayed ahead of them, moving frequently and using false names. When Nathan finally left the hospital, weaker but alive, he returned to a house scarred by bullet holes and silence. Something changed inside him. He had survived her attempt to erase him, and now he felt an obsessive need to confront her. He followed every clue she carelessly left behind, from old messages to a forgotten receipt buried in a handbag she had thrown away. Weeks later, he traced her to a coastal town called Redhaven, where she had rented a cottage under a new identity. Nathan traveled there quietly, fueled by a mixture of pain and purpose. When he found her living comfortably, as if nothing had happened, something inside him hardened completely. That evening, Elena was found dead inside the cottage. Nathan waited for police to arrive, offering no resistance when they placed him in handcuffs. The tragedy that began with betrayal ended with revenge, leaving Larkwood haunted by a story it would never forget. Nathan's arrest did little to quiet the storm that rippled through Larkwood. News of the case spread quickly, turning the once quiet town into a place filled with reporters, curious onlookers, and neighbors who whispered whenever Nathan's name was mentioned. People who had known him for years struggled to understand how the soft-spoken carpenter had crossed the line into murder. Others insisted that surviving 6 gunshots would break anyone's sense of reason. While the public argued, investigators focused on rebuilding the timeline that led from the shooting to Elena's death. They gathered records, traced phone signals, and interviewed anyone who might explain the chain of events. Every detail they uncovered deepened the unsettling picture of a marriage that had quietly decayed long before violence entered it. In the days following the killing, Nathan sat in a small interrogation room in Redhaven, staring at the table with a distant calm. Detectives tried to make sense of his journey across the country, but he spoke only when necessary. He admitted to finding Elena, admitted to being in the cottage, and admitted to not resisting when police arrived, but he offered nothing more. His silence frustrated investigators, who were convinced there was more beneath the surface, some emotion or moment that pushed him beyond survival and into vengeance. When they searched the cottage, they found Elena's belongings packed in hurried bags, as if she had planned to flee again. They also discovered documents showing her attempts to secure a new identity abroad. It became clear that she had no intention of facing consequences for the shooting. She had been preparing to disappear long before Nathan arrived. Back in Larkwood, residents struggled with their own interpretations of the tragedy. Some believed Nathan's actions were the predictable result of betrayal, fear, and trauma. Others insisted that no amount of suffering justified taking a life. The moral lines blurred even more when police revealed evidence of Elena's long-standing deception. She had not simply been unfaithful, she had been living an entirely different existence with a partner who had provided her money, shelter, and a plan to start over. The relationship had woven together secret finances, fake documents, and meetings in isolated places. Investigators concluded that her decision to shoot Nathan was not impulsive but carefully planned over weeks, maybe even months. That information changed the public's view once again, turning Elena from a victim into a dangerous figure whose choices had spiraled out of control. Nathan's psychological evaluation revealed the toll the shooting had taken on him. The trauma of surviving near death, combined with the betrayal of someone he had trusted completely, left deep emotional fractures. Experts who examined him described symptoms of paranoia, intrusive memories, and an overwhelming fixation on unfinished justice. These findings did not excuse his actions, but they helped explain the state of mind that carried him to Redhaven. Prosecutors argued that revenge was still revenge, no matter how wounded the person seeking it might be. Defense lawyers insisted that trauma driven by survival altered everything. As the investigation deepened, the case grew more tangled rather than clearer. The court prepared for a trial that promised to expose secrets, motives, and emotions that had been hidden beneath the quiet surface of Larkwood for years. The town braced itself, sensing that the darkest parts of the story had yet to unfold. The trial began with an intensity that Larkwood had never experienced. Courtrooms that typically handled minor disputes and small local cases were suddenly filled with national reporters, legal analysts, and crowds of people who wanted a glimpse of the man who had survived 6 gunshots only to take another life. Nathan entered the courtroom with a calm, almost detached expression. He moved slowly, still recovering from the injuries that had nearly killed him, but his eyes held a focus that made the room fall silent. Across the courtroom, a large display showed photographs of Elena, her life before the affair, and the evidence of the double life she had been building. The prosecution knew that the case was complicated. Nathan had been a victim before becoming an offender, so they aimed to present a clear narrative. He had hunted Elena down and killed her out of revenge, and revenge could not be excused by past suffering. The defense, however, built an entirely different picture. They brought in medical experts who described the lingering pain Nathan faced every day from the bullets that had torn through him. They discussed the psychological impact of betrayal and the violent attempt on his life, emphasizing the nightmares, panic episodes, and emotional breakdowns he had experienced in the hospital. They argued that Nathan had not sought revenge, but closure. The defense suggested that he traveled to Redhaven not with a plan to kill but with a need to confront the woman who had destroyed everything he knew about trust and safety. They described him as a fragile man pushed beyond his limits by trauma, abandonment, and fear of being targeted again if Elena remained free. Witnesses were called from Larkwood, each adding layers to the story. Neighbors spoke about hearing the gunshots and seeing Elena flee the home afterward. Friends of Elena reluctantly revealed her unpredictable behavior in the months leading up to the shooting, her frequent late nights, and her growing recklessness. A coworker admitted that Elena had spoken about wanting to escape her marriage entirely, though no one realized the extent of what she meant. The court learned about the wealthy partner she had run away with, a man who refused to testify but whose financial support of Elena was clearly documented. Bank statements, rental agreements, and digital records painted a picture of a woman who was actively building a future without Nathan, one that required Nathan to be out of the way. As more evidence surfaced, the case shifted from a simple act of vengeance to a complex narrative of survival, desperation, and psychological collapse. The jury heard details of Elena's preparations to flee the country, including forged documents and large transfers of money. They saw photographs of the cottage in Redhaven, the bags she had packed in a hurry, and the window she had tried to climb through just before Nathan found her. The trial became a battle of interpretations, whether Nathan acted as a man pushed to his edge or as someone who chose a deadly form of closure when he could have walked away. By the end of the third week, the courtroom carried a heavy tension. Every detail had been dissected, yet the core question remained painfully unclear. Was Nathan's final act a crime driven by pure anger, or the last step of a man crushed under the weight of trauma and betrayal? The judge prepared to deliver instructions to the jury, knowing that their decision would determine the legacy of a tragedy that had already altered countless lives. The jury began deliberations in a small room above the courtroom, a room that had never held so much weight before. They carried boxes of evidence, transcripts, psychological evaluations, and photographs that showed the contrast between Nathan before the shooting and Nathan after it. Hours turned into a full day, then a second, and tension spread through Larkwood like a stubborn fog. Reporters waited outside the courthouse, filling the air with theories and speculation. Some insisted the jury would show sympathy for a man who had survived a brutal attack. Others argued that sympathy had no place in the decision, because a life had been taken after the danger had passed. Inside the courthouse, Nathan remained silent, often staring at the floor as if trying to distance himself from the world around him. When the jury returned, the courtroom filled instantly. The verdict was read in a calm, steady voice, but the decision felt heavy enough to shake the room. The jury found Nathan guilty of manslaughter rather than murder. They believed he had acted under severe emotional disturbance and lingering trauma, but they could not ignore the reality that he had ended Elena's life deliberately. The decision upset people on both sides. Some felt it was too harsh for a man who had barely survived an attempted killing. Others claimed it was too lenient considering that he had tracked her down. Nathan's expression did not change. He accepted the verdict with a nod, as though he had expected no mercy, no matter the outcome. Sentencing became the next focus. Lawyers debated over the length of time he should serve, but the judge approached the decision with caution. Medical reports documented the permanent damage from the 6 bullets, damage that would affect Nathan for the rest of his life. Psychological experts spoke about his unstable mental state after the attack, describing him as someone who had lost the ability to process danger rationally. His body had healed, but his mind remained trapped in the moment Elena tried to kill him. After reviewing every detail, the judge handed down a lengthy sentence but one shorter than what normally accompanied manslaughter. Nathan would serve his time in a facility designed for inmates dealing with trauma, offering both security and treatment. Once Nathan was taken away, the courtroom finally emptied. The town of Larkwood watched the aftermath unfold with mixed emotions. Some residents felt a strange relief that the case was finally over, but others believed the story had left a permanent scar on the town. The house where the shooting took place was put up for sale, though few people wanted it. The cottage in Redhaven sat untouched for months, becoming a target of curiosity for tourists who had followed the case online. Elena's family held a small private service, but whispers surfaced about their shock that she had planned such an extreme escape. As weeks turned into months, the case continued to appear in news articles, documentaries, and online discussions. Everyone who learned about it found their own interpretation of the truth. Some viewed it as a tragic collapse of a marriage filled with secrets. Others saw it as a story of survival twisted into retaliation. Larkwood tried to return to normal life, but reminders of the tragedy were everywhere: empty rooms, abandoned buildings, and the knowledge that a single betrayal had shattered 3 lives forever. Years passed, but the story of Nathan and Elena continued to echo long after the final verdict. Larkwood never fully shed the weight of the tragedy, even as new residents moved in and old memories faded behind busier days. The town's identity had been reshaped by a case that once drew national attention. People still paused when walking past the Cole house, now painted over and renovated, yet unable to escape the aura of what had happened inside its walls. The new owners avoided questions, knowing that every neighbor carried a different version of the tale. Meanwhile, the cottage in Redhaven became a somber landmark, quietly associated with fear, flight, and the final moments of a life that had spiraled out of control. inside the facility where Nathan served his sentence, he followed a strict routine. Therapy sessions were mandatory, and medical treatments monitored the damage left behind by Elena's bullets. Though physically stable, he was a man marked by scars both visible and hidden. He rarely spoke about the shooting or the killing that followed. Instead, he focused on simple tasks assigned to him, woodworking projects, group exercises, and long hours spent writing thoughts he refused to share with anyone. Staff members observed that he carried himself with a strange mixture of calm and sorrow, as if he had accepted his fate but still struggled to understand the path that led him there. Over time, he developed a bond with no one, keeping his distance not out of hostility but out of exhaustion. Elena's family, still grappling with the shock of her double life, sought answers of their own. They had known her as a vibrant, ambitious woman, yet documents uncovered during the investigation showed a trail of decisions shaped by fear, secrecy, and reckless ambition. They spent months sorting through financial records, messages, and personal belongings she left behind, trying to make sense of why she believed violence was her only escape. The wealthy partner she had run away with disappeared from public view after police questioned him. His role in her plans remained a point of speculation, especially since he refused to explain how deeply he had influenced her decisions or how much she had hidden from him as well. The public remained divided. Online communities debated every detail of the case, analyzing motives, psychological states, and the moral weight of trauma. Documentaries retold the events with dramatic music, turning real suffering into episodes for entertainment. Students studying criminal psychology referenced the case as an example of how betrayal and violence can merge into something unpredictable. For many, it became a story used to warn others about the dangers of unresolved pain, secrets, and destructive relationships. Inside the quiet routine of his confinement, Nathan eventually reached a point of reflection. He understood that the choices made by both him and Elena had been shaped by a chain of decisions that none of them could undo. His life before the shooting felt like a distant memory, a chapter written by a different person. The tragedy had reshaped him, leaving a version of himself that lived in the aftermath rather than the past. In Larkwood, time softened the sharpest edges of the story, but it never erased them. People still spoke about the couple whose lives collapsed under the weight of secrecy and fear. The case remained a symbol of how quickly trust could break, how deeply betrayal could wound, and how one desperate act could grow into a tragedy that consumed everything around it. Ultimately, the story of Nathan and Elena became a quiet reminder that behind every peaceful home, there may be shadows hidden from view, shadows that, once exposed, can change a town forever.